how the caste system, this like racialized system of social control, operates once people are released from prison. And you would think that after you're done in prison, you're like, great, I spent my time in there and now I'm free. And the sad truth is that's not actually true. There's all these discriminatory policies in place that lead to more social control and stigmatization. And that's one. So she starts that you enter this brave new world, but you maintain this criminal label from being in prison, and this label really denies you the right from any civic duties, such as to vote or to serve on a jury. And as a result, you also face this social exclusion, have this lifetime of shame, contempt, and scorn. Leads to all these feelings of internalized oppression, internal exile, civic death, no longer able to participate in the society in which you once were. And you kind of wear this badge of inferiority where you kind of are seen as less valuable than the other member in society. So as a result of all this, because you have this badge, because you have this stigma, most of these people are ineligible for a lot of federally funded programs in sectors such as health, welfare, food, public housing, employment, and education. And so she goes on in the rest of the chapter to kind of really break down all the laws and policies and ideology that kind of maintain this system in these sectors. So No Place Like Home goes into really all of the housing discrimination that exists when you're released from prison and based on the stigma that you have. So I kind of actually want to go into this real explicitly so you kind of really get a sense of the language that's used and how explicit it is in denying some of these rights. So the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1988, which I think Ruby mentioned earlier, grants public housing agencies the authority to use leases to evict any tenant, household member, or guest engaged in any criminal activity near public housing. So even if you're not necessarily considered a criminal, just being around a criminal in public places, you can be discriminated against. Quality Housing and Work Responsibility Act of 1998 pretty much gives public housing agencies the right to automatically evict any drug offenders or any other felons, and also those who are believed to be using and offending. Then the Housing and Urban Development Department was a huge department that pretty much developed guidelines for eviction and screening for tenants who may have had criminal records. And so they also developed the one strike and one you're out policy, which pretty much allows any agency to evict drug offenders automatically from public housing. And so the Housing and Urban Development Department also pushed these policies of eviction and screening onto other agencies, and it became incentivized where your funding to the agency is based on your ability to develop effective screening and eviction policies. So then eventually the Supreme Court had a ruling in 2002 which pretty much said that you could be that public housing tenants could be evicted regardless of whether or not they had knowledge or participated in an alleged criminal activity, and that tenants could be held civilly liable for the non-violent behavior of their children or caregivers. So it's really kind of extending the range in with the people that you affect, and not necessarily so much that you committed something, but even just being perceived of committing something just by some image. And so a very important statistic was, roughly there's just over 300 million people in this country, and a sixth of them have criminal records, including those arrested but never convicted, and they too are excluded from public housing.
Austin. So this relates to work and applications. Box is securing employment. So on top of being discriminated against with all these agencies that are put in place once you receive a felony charge, you have to worry about securing employment. And that must be one of the most discouraging moments when you are released from your sentence. You have paid your time and your debt to society, and now you have to take care of yourself and family members that you have meeting you on the other side when you're released. So securing employment is something that you're heavily discriminated against because there's this box on the application that says, have you ever been convicted of a felony? If so, have you ever spent, I don't know the exact terminology, I always kind of have the privilege of checking, no. But there are some people that have to check yes, and if yes, why or what? And that's when it all turns south, because at that point, you have to be faced with that badge of inferiority. I am going to be judged based on my time in jail. The very last one, yes. So this is what a sample application looks like, and Angie, if you could just scroll down just a little bit. The box is not, go up a little bit. It's not always the same, but it says here, have you ever been convicted of or entered a plea of guilty, no contest, or had a withheld judgment to a felony? Yes. If yes, please explain. That's a way of discriminating, because once you can go back to the slide if you can, thank you. Once you get to that box and you check that box, they're going to go through your criminal background, and that's a chance that there's a huge chance that you will not be employed. Once you check this box, there's also you don't have to check that one. Not yet. There's also spatial mismatch. So in the event that you are able to get a job, it's probably going to be so far away from where you live. You hadn't had a job previously, so you won't have transportation. So the chances of you getting to that job is going to be far in a few days in between. You're going to have to take off days. You're going to be fired probably because you haven't been able to show up to work. You don't have transportation. Maybe the buses stop running because the only place that would hire you is somewhere that's not even remotely near any other, places of residence or schools or anything of that nature. So spatial mismatch is another big issue. If you click here, this just shows some of the states. There's a box if you go down. 13 states that actually ban the box. So you would have to go through them, but we just to see if you can maybe go through the first couple. Right, you can just go through the first few. Hawaii actually in 1998 becomes the first state to ban the box statewide. And then if you go Minnesota, 2009. So there's a progression of states that were willing to ban the box. But not totally, because it depends on the crime. It depends on how long ago the crime was committed, the nature of the crime, and then it also depends on the nature of the crime, and then how long ago the crime was committed, and how much time you served for the crime. So there are a lot of things that depend upon whether that box is actually going to affect your chances of being employed. Nebraska, 2014. So even up till yesterday, there are states that are still banning the box, and that's only 13 states. New Jersey, 2014. And that goes into effect on March 2015, if you notice that it said that. So, right, so it goes into effect March 1st, 2015, and applies to public and private employers with 15 or more employees. So there are a lot of stipulations. The next one is the black box. So it's not just the box. The box may apply to all felons. The black box applies to being black and being a felon. So jobless rate for black males, including those who are incarcerated, is 65% of black males are jobless. Mindset of society puts black men in the box. And then you have white male ex-offenders who are more likely to obtain employment than black male ex-offenders. And the EEOC guidelines prohibits flat bans, which is you must consider, this is what I said earlier, you must consider the nature and gravity of the crime, time passed, and the completion of the sentence, and also the nature of the job sought. So if it has anything to do with the crime that you actually committed, the chances of you getting a job is zilch. There were just some facts here. I don't think I'm going to be able to go through all of them, but sorry, Michael.
Where do you want me to go?
I think go down.
Down one more?
Yeah. Down. Here, recommendations. So these are just some of the EOC supports the following recommendations to encourage employment of qualified individuals with criminal records. So you have make people with criminal records a protected class. Expand ban the box. So it encourages other states to ban that box so that more ex-offenders can be employed. You have reform FBI rap sheets utilized by businesses screening applicants. So there's a lot of information that probably should not be available to places that are willing to hire you because it probably has nothing to do with the job or your ability to do the job. So the EEOC is working closely with ex-offenders in this respect to have more of them be able to get jobs. Because if you can get a job, you probably won't, the likelihood of you committing crimes will probably be lessened because you have a means of taking care of your family and yourself as well. So that's
okay. So then we get into debtor's prison a little bit. So you can't get a home, you can't get a job, you're just out of prison, and prior to going into prison, those that are convicted and go into report they have an annual salary, an average of $12,000, and so most of the people going into prison already live in historically marginalized communities, and so to add to that, prisoners are expected to pay for cost of imprisonment, including probation, fees, court fees, child support fees, drug testing, and these are only some. They go on and on and on, all these fees upon it that you're responsible to pay for. These poverty penalties, so late fees with payment plan fees for when you get out, and the agencies that kind of supported you to some extent, you're expected to pay them back and back. The federal law is actually able to garnish almost 2/3 of the wages for your child support, so you actually have no control in terms of how you're using the money for the little that you do have when you're out. Most states also may require those released to pay about 1/3 of their wages to these offices for services mentioned above. And so any time in which you're on probation or you're trying to pay back these fees, and you're unable to make these fees because you can't get a job, you don't have a home, you don't necessarily have the skill set to maintain a job, or as Jasmine was mentioning, the spatial mismatch, that your job is so far away, you can't get consistent, reliable transportation. So you may end up going back to prison for not being able to pay for these fees. You may also have your license suspended or revoked. And also while you're in jail, there is generally some work, but it's estimated to be about $3 an hour, and so not really giving you the opportunity to save, and all that you do save is immediately garnished. So by the time you are released from prison, not only can't get a job or a home, but you have no money to go ahead and proceed with. So that's okay, maybe there's hope for food, right? So there's a federal law, TANF, Temporary Assistance to Needy Families Program, but there's some limitations and discriminatory practices with that as well. There's a 5-year lifetime benefit, so once you've exhausted 5 years on this service, even if you need it beyond that 5-year period, you're not eligible to receive those services. You're also mandated to work to receive those benefits, but as previously mentioned, it's near impossible for these individuals, once released, to obtain a job and to maintain that job. Also, TANF requires states to bar any drug-related felony convictions, so if you were in prison for drugs, you're not able to receive these services, and also you're still expected to work even without providing adequate services for childcare. Okay, so no food, no house, no money, so you're not really in a great place, and then they decide that, in addition, you just can't have any participation in any civic practice, and so your right to vote is withdrawn, even when you're released on parole and released beyond parole. And so the restoration process for even trying to vote, once perhaps you've made it through parole, or perhaps you've made it through other policies, are really difficult, because you're expected to pay fines or court fees, or navigate a whole bunch of legal policies that you might not be able to pay to support, and they kind of take the place of modern day poll taxes and literacy tests, all these obstacles in the way from denying you these roads. In addition, fear of the government for racial oppression, acting against these people in other ways, also tends to keep people away from even trying to get these votes. They think that if I make myself a parent again, perhaps the government will do something else to me to deny additional rights or put me back in prison. And this has had such a significant effect on the political landscape that for the presidential election of 2000, had the 600,000 former felons that were convicted been allowed to vote, Al Gore would have won instead of Bush. So it really has a significant effect on the political landscape and really shaping additional policy nationwide. Okay, so all those access to resources completely denied, and you're like, well, maybe at least I still have my hope because I'm out, right? I'm not in prison anymore, and once again, that's denied to you too. The shame and stigma you get from being convicted as a criminal or as a felon is for life, and this quote is kind of taken from the perspective of someone who went through this process, and he just says that the government is really eager to catch you as the criminal black person, and really just see you as the archetypal figure who justifies under Jim Crow, being that criminal black man. And so this results in all this permanent social inclusion and the scorn and contempt that results when you return to your community, because even if you return to a community that might also be historically marginalized or went through the same experience as you, they usually tend, in the research provided by Alexander, that they tend to not really value that experience, and as a result, there's a lot of feelings of hopelessness and helplessness